my friends. I'm Frances Craw. I'm 97 years old, but I don't feel that old in my heart. But there are some things about being old that I don't like. I accept them because that's the lot of all humanity, and I'm not mad about it. I don't like that my hearing is not what it used to be, and I'm really quite blind, which is a big thing for me to adjust to. And my voice, I don't like my voice. But that's what happens when you get old, and if you live to be 97, you may have a squeaky voice too. But that doesn't change my heart or my enthusiasm for life or my enthusiasm for the Lord. I told a story that some people like that may tell you something about me. It was 2 years ago when I was being fitted with some new hearing aids, and the audiologist and I got quite well acquainted. And he said one day, "I'm so sorry that you not only have a problem with hearing, but that you are also so quite blind." And I said, "I know, I don't like being blind, but let me tell you, I'm not going to be blind very long because the Lord is coming." And he looked at me with a strange look, and he said, "Do you really believe that?" And I said, "Yes, I believe that." And then he said, "Why do you believe that?" Well, how would you answer somebody like that? You don't have time to tell them the whole story of the great controversy between Christ and Satan, and you don't have time to review the prophecies that give you so much hope and joy. So I said, the Bible teaches that every person in the world and every entity in the world, every church, every country, every people have a cup. And when that cup gets full, God springs into action. And I think the world's cup is rather full right now. And he agreed. He said, "I think so too." That's one thing that, and then 2 years later, this last fall, when he updated my hearing aids, I hadn't seen him for a couple of years, he told me about his mother who has cancer. And he said, "Frances, I wish you would pray for her." So that makes me have confidence that what I said to him 2 years ago may have resonated with him, and he may still be thinking of that. And I'm so glad I still have contact with him. If I were to just, in a sentence, tell you a synopsis of my life, I would say, I was born to a dedicated Adventist in an Adventist family, and my father died when he was still a relatively young man. He hadn't reached 40 yet, but he left my mother with 5 children, and my mother raised us. We were raised in Wisconsin, in the country where there was farming, there were many cows and animals, but there was not very much city. Somebody asked me the other day if I had ever been addicted to cola drinks, and I said, when I was growing up, none of my peers knew what cola was. We lived in the country, and we drank milk. I was born in New Mexico, and that's a story, too, that will belong to another paragraph. I was born in New Mexico. I was raised in Wisconsin. I was educated at Berrien Springs, along with all of my family, my brothers, 3 brothers and a sister. We all graduated from there. My mother taught us, you children are going to be missionaries, and missionaries always go to college. So never mind that we don't have any money, you're going to go to college. And we did. All 5 of us graduated from Berrien Springs. So I graduated from Berrien Springs, and my first teaching job after graduation was at Keene, Texas. My husband and I taught there 4 years, and then we were called to La Sierra, and we stayed there for 37 years until my husband retired. When we retired, we moved to Washington State, and sometimes I think we did more hands-on work for the Lord after we retired. Maybe more, at least more creative work for the Lord than we did when we were teachers. I was an elementary teacher. My husband taught in the college. He was a musician. He had his PhD in musicology. And we did a good work for the Lord. But when we retired and went to Washington State, we started a prison ministry. And we called our ministry a library, for a historic library. And we started writing to prisoners. We wrote to many prisoners. I put a large map on the wall and put a pin in all the prisons where we were sending. That map was pretty full of pins showing where we had sent books. We bought cases of Bibles and books, and we sent them out. We had 5 people from the Yelm Church in Washington who helped us by, my husband and I would write the letters to the prisoners and say what we were ready to put in that package to those prisoners, and the girls would find the materials and package them and take them to the post office and mail them. We worked at that. We were in Washington 13 years before my husband took a stroke and to the frontal lobes of his brain. And though he was a well-educated man, he was not able to use the intellect that God had given him to use for so many years. But then when he was gone, I live in a mobile park with other retired people in St. Helena. And for a long time,
Go ahead.
For a long time, I wrote a letter every morning about my experience in the Lord. And I sent it on email to over 100 people. And I shared it with the people in the park. There are 200 mobile homes in that park where I live. And I'd leave my copies of my letter in the mail room. Over 100 copies would be picked up every month. And the people there, now I can't see them because I'm so blind, but when they see me, they tell me who they are and remind me of the letters that I wrote to them. And I just rejoice in the experience that the Lord has given me. And so far, I'm well provided for, and I'm not sick, and I'm happy. I'm happy in the Lord. I rejoice every day. I ask the Lord to heal me from my blindness. I want to see, I want to read the Bible. I want to write like I used to write. But I remember the story in the Bible of Paul. He had a thorn in the flesh. It may have been blindness, but whatever it was, he said he asked the Lord 3 times to heal him. And the Lord finally said, "Don't ask me anymore. My grace is sufficient." So when I go through my darkened rooms now, and I come to something like happened to me today, when I spilled a whole cup full of soup all over me and all over the floor, how was I to clean that up? Oh Lord, your grace is sufficient. And it was. And I was able to do it. And when my friend Diane came to bring me to this appointment, she said that I had done a good job. The floor looked clean, and she said I looked all right. She just found a little spaghetti on the top of one of my shoes. But isn't God good? His grace is sufficient, and I can trust him, and I'm glad and rejoice every day. My day begins in the morning at 7 o'clock. Well, it begins earlier than that because I get up and dress and eat a good breakfast, and I'm ready at 7 o'clock to join others from the St. Helena Adventist Church. We converse together, 7 or 8 of us, on in the morning, and then we pray together for an hour. That gives me some real substance to my day and some character. And then I write then I walk with a friend of mine who lives nearby in the park. Her husband is gone, and we both live alone in our own house. She has diabetes, and she said, "I'm told I really need to walk. I need to walk every day, and I can't make myself do it. I don't want to walk. But you walk every day. I see you do it. Could I walk with you?" So she and I walk at 9 o'clock every day. We walk a mile, and I walk behind a 4-wheel walker just for safety, and she walks beside me. We can't talk about a lot of things because she differs in her idea of who created the world. So we talk about other things. We talk about what we're doing during the day and how we plan to keep the day happy and useful. She has a ministry that she doesn't call a ministry, but she calls it Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and she'll take anybody to the doctor that needs an appointment in the city. And I just love her so much. One day I know she's going to know the Lord. I could tell you another interesting situation. My husband and I spent our career in Southern California. When we came to St. Helena, in the dooryard of PUC, it was an entirely different situation. And during the years, we always, it was a good-natured conversation to compare PUC with La Sierra. And we would tell interesting stories, not in a derogatory way or an accusing way, but just to compare. It was kind of fun for us. Now I'm up here. I'm up here in Central California, and nobody here knows very much about me about my husband and I, because we served in another area. We were in Southeastern California Conference. And so I tell them, my brother, my oldest brother, was an academy teacher in Minnesota. My next oldest brother graduated from Berrien Springs and went as a missionary to the island of Mindanao in the Philippines, and he actually became the first president of our college on the island of Mindanao. My mother had taught us that we were going to be missionaries, so my brother was the first one to venture out as a missionary. Then my younger brother was called to Indonesia, and he was a missionary in Indonesia for 26 years. My sister and her husband, who was a minister, were called to Korea, but the war broke out and they didn't ever get to go there. But they served in Japan and in other places in the Far East. But my husband and I didn't go overseas. So I would say, you know, one brother was a missionary in the Philippines, one brother was a missionary in Indonesia, one brother was a missionary in Japan. But my husband and I were missionaries in La Sierra. And the people in St. Helena always smiled. And I said, you know, they needed them down there. So we have a good joke about it. But we're a missionary wherever we are. And even now, when I can't write those letters that I used to write, and I can't write to the prisoners, I had to give the names to someone else. There are so many things I can't do, but I'm still a missionary. I look for a place every day and pray that the Lord will give me some place to serve him. And I beg him not to let me live beyond the time when I can't serve somebody someplace. So every day is filled with challenge and with excitement to see what the Lord is going to open for me today. I remember the Great Depression. When people ask me if I remember the Great Depression, I really remember it. Everybody was poor, but my family were maybe the poorest of all in bank account or money, but we weren't poor in love for each other or in loyalty for each other or in our love and respect and trust in God. Yes, my brothers milked cows every morning at 5 o'clock because neighbors there were no milking machines back there when we lived in Bethel, Wisconsin. They had 40 cows to milk. They needed people to milk cows. Incidentally, I tried to learn how, at 11 years old, I tried to learn how to milk a cow. I never was able. I've learned a lot of things, but I never could really get any milk to come out of those teats when people were milking the cows. But I cleaned people's houses when I was 12 years old. I worked in the bookbindery at the academy where we rebound books. My mother moved to a part of the county that didn't have a high school, so they were willing to pay tuition to Bethel Academy, to the Adventist school, because they had no place to educate their children. And we were in that county, so all of us got our tuition. We lived at home, but we got our tuition paid through the academy by the county that didn't have a high school. So they educated us in the Adventist school. Yes, I remember the Depression. I remember how we struggled to have money to buy a pair of shoes. I remember when my mother would can apples in the summer without any sugar to put in the apples. So when we opened them in the fall, each 2 quarts that she would open, maybe we had sugar then to put in them. But that wasn't bad because we had plenty of whole wheat bread and milk. Later, when I took a minor in college and we did some experiments with mice and nutrition, we learned that whole wheat bread and milk was a diet that would satisfy everything in the body. You wouldn't die, you would live normally. Anyway, that's how we were raised. And we had plenty of food. It was very plain. We had enough clothing to keep us warm. And we cut down the trees in the woods next to us for wood. We were warm. That was a cold comment. No, we were provided for through the Depression. And incidentally, we don't know we're in the Depression now because we learned how to borrow money. When I was coming up back in the 30s, we didn't borrow money. If we didn't have money, we didn't buy it. But now we act like we have a lot of money in America, but actually the people that report on the statistics say that we really are very poor. So we need, and that makes me think, all of us are coming to a time of great depression, and I believe it could happen very fast. In fact, we are told that the time of trouble is coming on very quickly in a surprising way. So we need to learn how to depend upon the Lord. I thank God that we were poor when we grew up because we learned to trust the Lord. And that was something that's very, very important. You know, I remember the times when we lived in Wisconsin. Now when I get up and it's chilly in my rooms, I just flip a little switch and the furnace comes on immediately and every room is warm in a matter of a few minutes. In Wisconsin, my brothers would saw the wood into chunks and split it with an axe and pile it in, and we heated our homes that way. And we didn't have a telephone, and we didn't have hot and cold water. No, we went to the pump and pumped it and brought it in a bucket. And the water that after we used it, we poured in what we called a waste bucket. And we'd take it out and pour it over the bank. That was the kind of, and we had an outside toilet. No, we didn't know any different. Nobody else in the community lived any different. We weren't any different from the rest. That is, those conveniences I'm so thankful for now, I really am. But that isn't what makes life good. What makes life good is when you know the Lord and you can trust Him. How about the transportation when I was a child? We didn't have a car. Some people in the community did have cars, but we didn't have a car. And it was 4 miles to the store. And my mother would walk 4 miles and bring back a sack full of groceries. Of course, all she really bought was Crisco, some kind of shortening, and sugar and flour. And the flour we really bought in a sack of wheat. And my brothers had arranged a mill that they ran from the back wheel of a car. And so they would grind the flour for us. But no, now transportation is so different. So, and they're telling us that we're going to have cars in another couple of years, maybe more than that, if the Lord waits that long, that don't even need to be driven. They will drive themselves, and they won't get in any accidents like that. And the technology for learning, even when we moved from Washington 16 years ago, I didn't bring that 23 volumes of a encyclopedia that we had. Nobody needs it. You have a computer. The whole encyclopedia is on that computer, and you can search for it. Oh, it's so different from the time when I was growing up. When to telephone, you went to a phone. We didn't have one, but if there was one in the community, you ground a little wheel on the side, and if you wound it a long ring and a short ring, that meant somebody, and they would pick up the phone and answer it. And if you made another one of 3 short rings, that meant somebody else. And if you wanted to know the community gossip, you just listen in, and you'd hear everything that was going on in the whole country. We had fun in those days. But the whole world is different now, and I can't keep up with it. My computer is old, and I can't get a better one because I never would be able to see. Now I know where everything is on that old computer, and if I can't read the print for it, I still know where it is, and I can get there, and I can search for something. And if I get my fingers on the right keys, I can type with my eyes shut. And so I'm grateful for what we have. When we moved to the mobile home park where I live, it's called Vineyard Valley, my husband and I were walking on the sidewalk on a Sabbath afternoon. My husband could walk and talk. He just couldn't remember, and he couldn't think. But we had such good times together. And we met a woman on one of those Sabbath afternoon walks, and she said she taught at PUC, and in the nursing department. And I said, well, are you an Adventist? Because in La Sierra, there were teachers who taught at the college who were called, let's see, what did we have the name for them? They were not really faculty members, but they were hired to teach a certain subject. So I said, are you an Adventist? And those people at La Sierra were not necessarily Adventists. But I said, are you an Adventist? And she said, yes. And I said, so are we. We are 3rd generation Adventists. And I went on to tell her that my grandfather, my mother's father, helped build Union College. So I was a 3rd generation Adventist. And this friend looked at us and smiled, and she said, I'm a 5th generation Adventist. I know my relatives experienced the great disappointment. They were relatives of the Farnsworths, way back there at the beginning of our church. I'm really excited about the history of our church. Just today, I was reading on my computer something I had filed there. It was so fascinating that I didn't even want to stop to eat my lunch. It was the story of the Great Disappointment in 1844. But it started out by telling the excitement of all the people that were learning the prophecies. And it even went before that to tell what people had believed about the prophecies earlier. So, yes, I love the stories of our pioneers. And I love the projection that I learned from studying the prophecies of how we are going to finish this great movement that began way back there in 1843 and before. I'm excited about it. I love to teach the prophecies. My husband and I wrote, when we were in Washington, studied the prophecies and wrote a verse-by-verse comment on all the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, using the rules that the General Conference had laid down back in 1980 when they had this big world conference over Desmond Ford's thoughts. We thought, well, let's use those rules, that they really work. And I just am so excited about the study of how the great controversy is going to end. I love to read about how our church began, and I love to read about how it's going to end. Ellen White has told us such a good story about it. But can you read it really from the Bible? We decided to try. So we just took the Bible and the rules and to see where we came out. And it's so exciting. Yes, I'm very much excited about the beginning of our movement and the hope and the surety we have of how it's going to end. My husband and I plan to graduate in the next spring. That was 1942. We would have graduated the next spring from Berrien Springs. But he was drafted. He was deferred twice for high scholarship. But when after they sunk our fleet of ships, the Japanese started this war, then everybody was drafted who was well enough to go, and my husband was drafted in the Army. We intended to be married after we graduated in June, but we decided to be married right then before he would go into the Army. Maybe that was a foolish thing for us to do. Some people, I'm sure, thought so at the time, but it worked out very well for us. So my husband was inducted in the Army on Thursday, and we were married on Friday, the 3rd of July, the next day. And he had a few weeks to supposedly shut down his civilian business before he would be taken into the Army. He was taken in, and he was in the Army for 2 years and 8 months. 2 years of that time were spent in North Africa, in French Morocco, which was something that was fortunate for Alan, because he knew the French language so well and loved it. So when he went to Morocco, the church in Morocco said, here we have a soldier from America who has been to college. He not only taught the Sabbath school lesson and played the piano and led the music, he also preached the sermon in French and gave Bible studies in French. And in the Army, I have to back up a little bit, because when he was in Oklahoma, in his previous overseas experience, I was down there with him and had rented a room in Muskogee, Oklahoma. It was the time when school was starting, and I thought, oh, I'm going to register for a class, for an evening class. They were free. I thought, I'll learn shorthand. So I went there and I got my books, and my husband would come in from the Army base and look at my books, and he was fascinated by it. He learned shorthand while we were there, just studying the book. I never did learn it, but he learned it. And when he was in Casablanca, North Africa, the Army drafted him to take dictation in French in the civil court. So he was very much in demand because he not only knew the secretarial skills that they needed in the Army, but he knew the language and he could use it. So he had an interesting time in North Africa. There was one family called the Rebsmans, Adventist family, who invited him almost every Sabbath, I understand, to come to their home on Sabbath. He became very good friends of that family. And when we went to France years later, they had moved to France in the interim. And when we visited France, we visited them in their home. They're both, the Mr. and Mrs. Rebsman are both gone now, but their son became a minister and lives in Canada. And he called me just the other day with so much appreciation for Brother Craw, who came from the Army to play the piano and sing with them in their home every week when these were just children in the family. Yes, and during the war, it was a very hard time, because while he was in North Africa, there were 13 weeks that I got no word for him at all. And every day the papers were screaming about boats that had gone down in the Mediterranean. And things were so unsettled. And I hadn't finished college, but I taught a church school in Urbandale, part of Battle Creek, and the experience that I had there for weeks and weeks without a letter from Helen, no word at all what had happened, and of course the rationing, the gas rationing, and people couldn't buy things for their car. You couldn't buy butter. You couldn't buy meat. That didn't bother my family any. But all of this was only obtained by special. We had to give them stamps, and when you'd use them up, then you couldn't buy. You had to buy with stamps. You had to buy sugar and butter. People had jobs during the war that hadn't had jobs before, but it was a very unsettled time. Oh, those were not good years. Not at all. But God brought us through, and we won. And now I wonder, we're in a war, I wonder how we'll ever win it. And we don't need to. The Lord is coming. He's going to settle things. And it just fills me with so much hope and joy. Remember anything about camp meeting? Yes, I did. And we would get to camp meeting. And in some of those years, we had a car that my brothers drove. My mother never did drive a car, but my brothers drove the car. And we'd go to Portage, Wisconsin, to the camp meeting. And we'd live in a tent. And it was such a thing to look forward to. And we would listen to all the sermons, and we would make an offering of what money we could. It was just a joy. And during that time, when I was in the academy, I canvassed in the summertime, and they had a special tent where they showed about what was being done in the colporteur work. So I spent quite a bit of time there. And we always had special clothes, and we would bring, I remember my mother canned milk in quart jars with, like you would can anything. And it didn't taste very good to us, but we had whole wheat bread and milk in our tent every day for food. And if we had money enough to buy a hymnal so we could sing with the others, then how lucky we felt. And we had our Bibles, and we really listened to what was being told. It was a happy time for us. I remember hearing HMS Richards preach. I remember hearing the quartet and being so proud of them. I remember all the missionary stories, Eric Hare's stories. I was fascinated by them, and he was often at the camp meetings. I wonder how many camp meetings I really attended in Portage, Wisconsin. I don't remember the large gatherings we had later. Do we have in Washington, while we were there at Auburn at the academy, they had camp meeting. But many of our churches, and when I was in La Sierra, there wasn't a camp meeting with tents. They had a large gathering in a pavilion. Let's see, where was it? Anyway, it was not tents. You would just go there for a large gathering and a meeting for a weekend. Someone asked me how I managed when I didn't hear from my husband during the war for 13 weeks. That was the whole summer, from the time school was out in the spring. I was teaching in Urbandale the 2 years that he was in North Africa. And 13 weeks is a long time. I tell you, you learn to depend upon the Lord. I remember this happened later, but it illustrates what happened to me during those long times when you wondered if it was ever going to end and how it was going to end. But I was told to think of an altar and lay on it everything you wanted to trust the Lord for, that you couldn't if you couldn't manage it yourself. And I thought, what things do I want to put on that altar to show that I trust the Lord? I started with this, that I remember learning this while my husband was teaching in La Sierra. On there, how would I get along if my husband lost his job? Yes, Lord, I would be happy if I had you. I would be all right. It wouldn't matter. And then suppose you lost your reputation. Because we had a good reputation. And it's easy to feel proud of yourself. And what if I lost that? Oh, that would be pretty bad. But yes, if I had the Lord, it wouldn't matter if I had another friend in the world. What would happen if you lost your bank account, your home, and all the things you've worked for? Yes, Lord, even if I was homeless and had no money at all. If I had you, I would be all right. I didn't know that story while my husband was overseas during the war, but those are the principles that I lived on. Would I be satisfied with the Lord if we lost the war? If I lost Alan? If I lost all the dreams that we had? If I lost my reputation? What would happen? And I always was so glad to say, yes, if I had the Lord, I would be all right. And that's the way I live today. I may become totally blind. I have macular degeneration, and usually we don't lose everything. We just lose the thing we're looking at, but we can see light on either side. But what would happen if I was completely in the dark? Oh, if I had the Lord, I'm going to be all right. When my husband and I were finally reunited after the war, well, let me tell you that they let the soldiers come home by counting a number of points, and I don't remember how they came to the points, but if they had a certain number of points, they could come home. My brother, who had served in Germany during the war, had only been over there less than a year, and he got to come home before my husband, because they expected my husband to come home and then be shipped into the Pacific to continue fighting the war. But the war was over, and I still have a paper, the Chicago Tribune, with 4-inch high letters, "The war ends." What a day, what a shouting. The war ends, and we had won. And my husband had points enough to come home. That was a beautiful moment. And the day came when he would actually be at the station, the train that would bring him from the ship in New York would land in Battle Creek. And I went there. Oh, I remember. Oh, I wanted everything to be just right. I had a new coat, and it had fur on it. And I remember, oh, that's going to be so nice. He's going to see this nice coat, and I'm going to stand straight. And then he got off, tall and handsome, and he was home. And we graduated. He got home in December. We graduated in June. That's how close we were to graduation. And then, but it was a conundrum for him, how to after being almost 3 years in the military, to take up civilian life. And he had calls to several academies. He had no problem with people who wanted him, but he said, I'm not ready to do that. I don't want to do it. I don't know how to do it. So he had decided that he was going to work for another degree and go to school in one of the schools in Chicago. So I took the church school in, it was the north side of, no, was it the northern side? It was the poor side of Chicago, and he was going to go to school. But then he got a call to Keene, Texas, and that he thought he could do. He thought he could teach piano, and he could do that. So we took that, and I had to stay in Chicago and finish my contract until they found somebody to take my place. So he went off to Texas and left me in Chicago, where in my classroom my Adventist church school classroom, the elevated train went right over the roof of the school where I taught. Every 13 minutes, that train roared over the rooftops of where I was teaching. But the day came when they found a replacement for me, and I joined him in Texas. We have had such a wonderful experience together. 61 years we stayed married together. And we had 3 children. The first child, our firstborn, was born with a heart defect. He only lived 2.5 years. Still one of the saddest parts of my whole life was to lose that baby. But God gave us a daughter and a son after that. They were both healthy, and they're both healthy today. And I just pray that they will be in the kingdom, along with little Kevin that we lost when he was still just 2 years old, 2.5 years old. So God is good. Someone asked me if my husband ever was in the battle. No, he wasn't. He was assigned to 56th Station Hospital. And that was a hospital that was an American hospital in Casablanca. And all the prisoners from that part of that they took in that part of the war, the conflict, was sent there. And my husband didn't actually work in the hospital. He was so valuable to them in his skills, I guess you'd call it secretarial skills. He was very skilled. He didn't have computers, but he became skilled in computers later. But he was skilled in the typewriter and he was just a good detail man. And so he was hired. His job was to write the checks every month to the people in the 56th Station Hospital. And so he never did experience the shooting war. You know, someone asked me how he learned his languages. He just loved to learn languages, and he had a special aptitude for it too, of course. He graduated from a large high school in Battle Creek, as they called it the valedictorian of the class. And then he didn't have money to go to college, so he stayed out of college. But that didn't stop him. His parents worked at Battle Creek Hospital, Kellogg's Battle Creek Hospital. And his father was a painter, and his mother had been a nurse. She actually didn't work there, but Alan's father worked at that hospital. So he was out of college. He didn't go to college, but he just loved languages, and he learned French in high school, and he built on that, and he learned German. He just loved I think it was like, I said it was like you laid a blotter over something and the blotter would just soak it up. He just remembered those languages. And he spoke French he had a good ear. I think that was part of his musicianship also. But he could hear that language and he could speak it perfectly, they said. So, and then he was interested in the Bible. So he was studying, even in La Sierra while he was professor there, he was studying Hebrew. And I think I still have some of the cards that he was using, flashcards, to hone in his work in Hebrew. And our son has not learned that many languages, but our son has that same wonderful capability. It's a gift from God that you can just remember and learn things.
Absolutely. What was your husband's name?
Alan, his name was Howard Allen Craw. My husband's name was Howard Allen Craw. And when I first met him, I thought, but he was called Alan. His family called him Alan. And I said, oh, that's such a sissy name. I will call, if I ever have a chance to change his name, he's going to be Howard. But when I had a chance to do it and tried to do it, I couldn't do it. Alan was his name, and I learned to love it. So, but he had many gifts. He was really a gifted person. And I was gifted that we had a chance to work together that long.
Absolutely.
Virgil Bartlett was the first president of Mountain View College. It's called that today. He was called back over there. He's dead now, but he was called back over there for one of their celebrations for that college, just as an honor for him to be there. And my younger brother was in Indonesia. There he served. He really was a dedicated. He called himself an evangelist, but he did was the president of our college for part of that time. Well, I think the college was in Jakarta. I wish that we had visited him in Indonesia in those years, but we didn't think we had the money to do it, but I would love to have done it.
So what was his name?
Alvin.
Alvin Bartlett.
Alvin.
Is that one T at the end?
Two T's. The Bartlett is spelled Bartlett.
All right, and Alvin Bartlett.
Yes.
And he was the president of the college there in Indonesia, in Jakarta?
I think it was Jakarta. I might be mistaken, but wherever one. I think we have more than one college.
We do. We have one in Manado called, now it's called Mount Klabat Adventist University. And all right, Alvin Bartlett.
Yes.
So your maiden name is Bartlett.
Yes, my name is Bartlett. And and my mother, talking of my personality, she said, Francis, you have an English name, a beautiful word, Bartlett. But that's the only part of you that's English. The rest of you is straight German Dutch. We'd all laugh about that. And stubbornness is a bad characteristic, but in a way it's good. My mother used to point out, you need to be absolutely decided about what's right and wrong and not afraid to do it. So that, but my name was a beautiful name, Bartlett. And I changed it for the word Craw. Who would have done that? However, I didn't marry my husband for the beauty of his name, but for the beauty of his character. In thinking of what Bible verse means the most to me, there are so many, and they all are indispensable. But the one I think that comes to mind so often in my experience is Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good to those who love the Lord. So when I spilled the spaghetti today on the floor and on my clothes, and And I didn't intend to have to clean that up, and I couldn't really see it. How could I do it? All things work together for good. This could be good. It wasn't good in comfort, but in the big scheme of things, all things work together for good. So that was even, things like that are even God's way of perfecting us and teaching us to trust in Him. Trust in Him in every part of life. My name is Frances Craw. I was born in 1918, and I'm still alive and trusting in the Lord and working for Him with all the talent that He allows.